Experiences have shown that sustained level of investment is necessary for maintaining long-term economic growth and competitiveness. However, if we look at Pakistan, the performance of tax to GDP ratio falls short compared to our neighboring country. Socio-economic environment in Pakistan is not investment friendly. Doing business in Pakistan presents a lot of challenges which involve lengthy official approvals, unjustified procedures and inconsistent policies. Our regulatory framework is outdated and inefficient. The investment and GDP ratio is low because taking any economic activity involves an extensive sluggish paper-based approvals which often take years. And because of this sluggish process, businesses are disheartening and they are moving out of country or they reduce growth. And it is no wonder why the firms are stunted. We have talked a lot about tax to GDP ratio, but I would like to divert your attention to another important ratio, that is investment and to GDP ratio. Well, as we all know that investment has been widely recognized as a potent variable for economic growth, and it provides the fuel to propels businesses forward, facilitates innovations and enhances productivity. Experiences have shown that sustained level of investment is necessary for maintaining long-term economic growth and competitiveness. However, if we look at Pakistan, the performance of tax to GDP ratio falls short compared to our neighboring country. And this low ratio that at 15% present a hurdle to achieve sustained economic growth. Both, if we look at our demography and debt sustainability, both demands that Pakistan must grow at a rate higher than 8%. But if we look at our current incremental capital output ratio, to attain a 8% growth rate, this ratio must be 28.8%. No question that comes to mind is that what is constraining in this investment in Pakistan? I think you need not to be an analyst to realize that the business or socio-economic environment in Pakistan is not investment friendly. And the regulations is the main hurdle in improving the investment ratio in Pakistan. Doing business in Pakistan presents a lot of challenges which involve lengthy official approvals, unjustified procedures and inconsistent policies. Without improving investment climate, the prospect to enhance the domestic investment, let alone attracting the foreign investment, appears dismal. Now, if we rank the investment constraining factors in Pakistan, I think the regulatory burden must be among the top. Our regulations, again, is not business friendly. This is mainly because our regulatory framework is outdated and inefficient. There is a study at PIDE which indicates that why our regulatory framework is inefficient. Our regulators often exhibit tendency that limited or very low understanding of markets and the role of regulations. So this is the main reasons. That's why the regulatory quality index of World Bank rightly presents a concerning pictures. This index actually captures the ability of a government to formulate and implement effectively policies and regulations that support private sector growth. Pakistan performance compared to other countries is very poor, and which, in fact, except for Bangladesh, all other countries outperformed Pakistan, which indicates that their regulatory framework is more favorable for private sector growth. It seems that we have developed a never-ending desire to regulate and control the market. This graph illustrates that over the last decades, the number of regulation, licenses, registration, and other regulatory burdens have been doubled. In essence, we have increased the regulatory burden on the private sector significantly in the name of market development, provision of protections, consumer protections, safety, and equity. Bodies has led us to a point where operating informally appears to be a more economically rational decision than operating formally. And here is a sector-wise breakdown of our regulatory burden based on the Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative repositories. But at PIDE, we believe that the actual number of regulatory burden is higher than the depicted ones. The point to be noted here is that the sectors which have the highest regulatory burden tend to exhibit the higher incidence of informality. For example, look at the wholesale and retail trade sector, which has the highest number of licenses, registers the highest number of informal entities as reported by the State of Commerce report of PIDE. And here comes another evidence which is widely quoted, the PIDE slide series. This series revealed that how we are overly bureaucratic and how we are business unfriendly. The investment and GDP ratio is low because taking any economic activity involves an extensive sluggish paper-based approvals which often take years. And because of this sluggish process, businesses are disheartening and they are moving out of country or they reduce growth. And it is no wonder why the firms are stunted and the and the stock exchange market is shrinking. I think the regulatory framework of Pakistan is a classical example of regulatory failure. And government try to address this failure by making more regulation instead of addressing the underlying reasons. As I mentioned that there is a study at PIDE which mentioned there are three key reasons or main reasons for regulatory failure. Number one is that our regulation, number one is our regulatory compliance is high because of complex regulatory mechanism or regulatory framework. Number two is the use of regulation for private gains instead of making our developing markets. And the number three reason is that there is a limited or lack of knowledge related to the cost and related to the demand and cost structure of the industry. At PIDE, we have measured at the federal level, we have more than 122 regulatory bodies and government is creating regulatory bodies, and we are hearing that there is a bill that there will be an e-regulatory bodies which will regulate the e-commerce. And the cost of, hidden cost of regulation is huge. And reform failure has placed the entire economy at a greater risk. I think Pakistan has not learned from the development experience of other economies. And our government still seeks to control the behavior of economic agents. If Pakistan wants to grow, we need to focus on investment to GDP ratio. And to attract both domestic as well as foreign investment, what is required is a deep deregulations. We need to liberalize our markets. But if we look at the current structure of our markets, the key player is the government. The footprint is the government is more than 64% in the GDP. So markets only functions if the rules of the game are well defined and effectively implemented. What we need are clear rules that ensures the exchange of information and exchange of rights, which are the key fundamental elements of the markets, are efficiently in place. And therefore, we have to streamline our regulatory framework and we have to do away from permissions. What we are proposing is that define clear rules and go away with permissions. To move forward and to end permission stan and which Pakistan has become, and to modernize our regulatory framework, there are two options. The first option is two approaches. The first approach is piecemeal approach or bottom-up approach, which Pakistan has been trying since last decade. And experiences have shown that economies like Pakistan, which which have a lot of regulations, this approach will not work. The other approach and most promising one is regulatory approach, which Dr. Nadeem has already talked about. And at PIDE, we advocate that Pakistan must adopt the regulatory guillotine approach. And there are many success stories like Hungary, Mexico, South Korea, and UAE who have adopted this approach to modernize their regulatory framework. So Pakistan also needs to adopt this regulatory approach. What is regulatory guillotine strategy? It is basically a bold strategy to rapidly cut down outdated and cumbersome regulations. The strategy based on a default assumption that all the regulations will be eliminated unless the regulatory authority provide a clear justification based on some kind of argument, mostly cost-benefit analysis, for retaining the regulations. So what we are proposing is that the cabinet should do a regulatory review, a systematic review, within a set time frame, let's say 3 months, and ask all regulatory bodies to justify the retention of any kind of regulations. So after 3 months, only those regulations will be retained, though that have clear cost-benefit background behind them. Besides modernizing our regulatory framework, we also need to control the flow of regulations. For that, PIDE is proposing a regulatory impact analysis approach. And this regulatory impact analysis must be based on these considerations which are in the slides. In fact, what we are proposing is that we need a Pakistani equivalent of Office of Management and Budget and the Paper Reduction Acts. We need decisive actions in two aspects. The first one is to modernize our regulatory framework through regulatory guillotine strategy, and the second is to control the flow of regulations through reform impact assessments. And since this regulatory modernization initiative is not possible without a strong political support, and here we are recommending that the Planning Commission can take the role, a leading role, and drive this initiative. If we modernize, as Mehtab asked that, what would be the short-term solutions? This can be one of the short-term solutions. If we modernize our regulatory framework, then the benefits are beyond just market developments. At PIDE, we try to estimate the benefits of regulatory modernizations by assuming that the sludge in identified sectors eliminated. By using the input, output, and forward linkages, here is some our estimation results. The results shows that we can get an initial boost of 3.9% of GDP if we modernize our regulation in the first round. And this figure increased to 4.1 to 4.3% in the second and third round, respectively. Besides economic growth, regulatory modernization also brings us 2 million new jobs in the economy, as well as it will increase our investment to GDP ratio by equivalent to 1.6% of GDP. So here is a further breakdown. If we look at the investment, we can increase our investment to GDP ratio to 8.5%, besides the IMF projections, if we modernize our regulatory framework, as well as we can create 2 million more jobs. And our potential economic growth will be 9.4%, alongside the projected IMF growth. So what we are proposing is that regulatory modernization can take us to a higher growth trajectory if implemented effectively. Of course, this demands a meticulous planning, stakeholder involvement, and a steadfast commitment by the leadership or political leaderships. So I would like to end with a humble submission that we have to end Permissionistan, which Pakistan has become. Let people work and invest without being the fear of labeled as cheaters or frauds. So thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I thought that was an excellent presentation from PIDE, and I don't think there's much there that we would disagree with. I think very empirical, very sharp, and some very good examples. I think that the problem is very clear. We have a proliferation of regulatory agencies, literally hundreds of regulatory agencies. We have hundreds of laws, some dating back, somebody just pointed out to me, the Factories Act of 1934 still governs the operations of factories in Pakistan. We have an Investment Act that legally precludes foreign investment in sectors unless there is no domestic activity occurring. We have a system in which there are city-level municipal authorities issuing hundreds of different permit types, including for activities such as selling fruit. In this kind of regulatory morass, it's impossible not only for firms to comply, but firms to even know what they're supposed to be complying with. And it's very clear that this is having a major impact on investment in Pakistan. And so I just wanted to make two real points here to add to the very good points already made by PIDE. The first is that the regulatory problems, this microeconomic problems around the regulatory, really are the foundation of some of the macroeconomic problems that Pakistan is facing as well. We have a situation in which at any time the economy grows, we end up with increasing imports, stagnant exports, a balance of payments crisis. Why is that? Why does that happen? It's because growth in Pakistan's economy goes to consumption and imports rather than into investment that would expand the productive potential of the economy. For as long as there are these disincentives to investment, we are going to see this periodic cyclical crises. We're going to see Pakistan limp along at growth rates that are completely inadequate to achieve the type of poverty reduction and growth that we need. So yes, regulations are a problem for business. Regulations are a problem for business people, for employment, but they're also a real constraint to the type of productivity improvements, competitiveness that Pakistan needs to achieve if it's going to get out of this cycle of macroeconomic crises. So all of these things fit together. The fiscal discussion that we've been having really is the other side of the regulatory discussion we've been having, and we need to address both of these challenges at once. And one data point that I just wanted to point out here, foreign direct investment into Pakistan, around 1% of GDP. That compares to 15, 20% in Southeast Asian countries, where the investment environment is conducive, where it's attractive to foreign investment, where you can mobilize international capital to fill your investment gap and realize some of the real potential of integration into global supply chains, global production, export opportunities. So unless we address the regulatory constraints, we're not going to attract the domestic investment, we're not going to attract the foreign investment, we're going to continue to have these major constraints to competitiveness. And with that, it's very hard to see how Pakistan moves towards sustainable growth. What to do? I mean, I think exactly PIDE's recommendations, they make so much sense, we would fully endorse them. I think that it's important to consider the political constraints that we're facing here. I think it's very hard for government agencies to give up areas where they have control. There is a political economy dynamic here, and that really has fed into the way we've approached reforms in the past and what we would recommend in the future. So through the BOI, the Board of Investment, we managed to achieve quite rapid progress and simplifying some of the business regulatory constraints through the Doing Business initiative, where we saw Pakistan move from 149th to 108th in a very short period of time. But that's still 108th of, I think, about 180 countries covered in that index. So Pakistan really still towards the bottom of that distribution. But what we did learn from that experience is that rapid progress is possible if there is strong political ownership, if there is a process that coordinates between the provincial and the federal level and has them working together, and if there is a process that brings in the voice of the private sector to guide and inform the decisions about what can be simplified, what can be cut, and what the binding constraints are that should be addressed first. So that would be our recommendation for the way forward. We're working on this, on the PRMI with the government. We have a new project in place, the DEEP project, which is providing substantial technical assistance to that process. But we're at the very early stages, and it's by no means certain that success is ensured. For this to achieve success, we need quick wins. We need to show that this time it's credible, that this time it's different, and we need to have a broad political consensus on the need for deep, deep reform. So first step is mapping the regulatory environment. The second step is cutting everything that can be cut, removing everything that's redundant. And the third step is digitizing and unifying systems so that firms that can and want to comply find it easy to do so. We will need an agency set up that's empowered to do that. We need to make sure that whether that sits under the planning department, wherever that sits, there is a unified agency with responsibility for that initiative across federal and provincial governments so that it has the political weight to cut through the vested interests, to cut through the constraints that have impeded progress in the past. With that kind of regulatory delivery office mentality set up, accountable, small, highly empowered office with the legal authority that is needed, we really think we could see some progress here. Let me stop my remarks at that. Thank you very much.
Well, before we start, you mentioned the improvements on the ease of doing business. I would like to take the comments from the person behind this improvement, who has been working for 25 years on the reform. Mukarram Saab, please, can you join us?
Thank you very much. A very, very interesting session that I came for specially, and wonderful presentation, and a lot of things that needed to be said have been said by Tobias. So we all agree that there should be ease of doing business. I've been as a civil servant, so I present that part. Why doesn't it actually happen? When everybody says, when the academia says, when the media says, when the businesses say, when the politicians say that we should have ease of business, why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't it happen? What stops it? So for example, the DEEP project that we're talking about, I was at BOI, and 2 years ago we prepared the DEEP project, and it's taken us 2 years just to approve the project. So if it takes 2 years to, and the DEEP component which deals with ease of doing business has not been changed at all. So it is the same thing that was stuck in the works for 2 years. And I would disagree with having this initiative sit in any institution to make it work. The ease of doing business that we were able to accomplish were accomplished only when the Prime Minister was directly steering it. In India, it was the Prime Minister who had a shout of end of license Raj. And the Prime Minister drove it, and it happened. Why doesn't it happen? Because there are beneficiaries of this regulatory environment. And it starts from the top. So the ministers who have departments of regulations under them have people approach them for favors of regulatory permissions. So a lot of powers that ministers derive are from the regulations that are in place. And below the ministers are the government departments, in which again the regulatory permissions, NOCs, licenses give them their power. And below the senior management, there is the operational management, which is there forever. Factories department, labor department, social security department, they know. And below that is a hidden layer. That hidden layer is the intermediaries. Those accountants, those lawyers, those consultants whose bread and butter depends on regulatory difficulties. And behind them are hidden certain businesses who have created these barriers to entry. So if it is very difficult to get a pharmaceutical manufacturing license, guess what happens? The market share remains with the people who already have permission. Would they like new entrants? No, they would not like new entrants. So if you really want to make it happen, you have to realize that there are people in the market who want to have entry barriers. There are intermediaries who want to have these regulations in place. There are civil servants who drive their powers from their regulations. And there are ministers who can give favors to their supporters for these permissions and licenses. I've been working in regulatory reforms for 22 years, and I have paid the price again and again. So the easiest way to sabotage any initiative is to change the person. So if somebody is creating a lot of disruptions, get him moved to a better position, some other position, so that it is sabotaged. So this is what's been happening. Dr. Nadeemul Haq, who's sitting here, has been crying hoarse about deregulation for many years. I've personally worked with him. There was one regulation which was just about having similar food standards across the country. It took us 2 years after the approval of the Council of Common Interest, which is the highest constitutional body in Pakistan, headed by the Prime Minister, and all the chief ministers sit in together. It made a decision, and the implementation of that decision took 2 years to happen. So this is what the road is like. It's all very nice to say that this should be done, this can be done, we've made some progress, etc., etc., etc. But as a veteran of a quarter of a century, since 2001, I've been 23 years, I've been working in reforms. I tell you, it's uphill up all the way. The stakes are so high that those who benefit from these regulations will go to any extent. They will go to any extent to not make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Now the floor is open for questions. By the way, sir, due to disruptions, you were awarded the most disruptive civil servant by the World Economic Forum, and you are paying the prize. So the floor is open for the questions.
Assalamu alaikum ji. Thank you. My question is regarding the ease of doing business ranking. Why are we still wanting to pursue it? It's a failed concept. It's had its problems. Why do we not focus on the underlying issues that cause issues with with companies setting up and working? Why do we want to improve our ranking only and go from number 58 to 24, for example, or something? Russia tried it and they didn't do too well.
I think we are not pursuing improvements in the ease of doing business. Our point is very simple. Our point is that we need to modernize our regulatory systems. So, but I think you are diverting your question to Tobias. Okay.
Maybe I can just reply very briefly. The Doing Business Index is no longer being prepared. We're moving towards a new report, which is called Be Ready. And that is a much more in-depth analysis. And it really is trying to focus on the lived experience of firms rather than formal compliance with specific indicators. So just to finish, I mean, I think the Doing Business indicator will no longer be the index by which we're tracking progress.
A question from the back.
My name is Mudassir Hussain. I've spent a good fair amount of time as a technocrat in the government, telecom, tech sector, currently with Jazz. So a specific question and a generic one too. Tobias, we keep hearing a deep project. If there is something so sweeping coming up, why does the industry, the public not know what the component of this is? What I gather here is that regulatory impact assessment should be the basis, improving regulations, fine, I've spent a fair amount of time over there. What you see is you propose a new body at the Planning Commission to regulate the regulators, you know, in simple words. So how do you think will that help? And what is most of the time what our issue is after having gone through this is that we want to set up an evaluation criteria and a performance criteria, but we don't know exactly what we're looking for. So who for different regulators will this set up? Because technology has a direct interest and impact from the regulation it faces today. And we see that technology is the basis of transformation for everything we see here. So what exactly is the component that we are proposing? Coming to specific, we've talked abstract for quite a long while. Now we should get into the core of the business. So if you would want to respond, any one of you, it's welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I prepared the business component of the DEEP project. DEEP project has multiple components. The business component, I will say it very simply, I will not go into any technicality. What we want from DEEP is a business portal. And what would that business portal do? You log on to it, you say, I want to set up a restaurant in Sheikhupura. What approvals do I need? So it will tell you that these are the approvals, these are the documents, these are the fees. Online, you submit the documents, your national identity card or something, and online you submit the fee and you get your licenses done from that. It's not something extraordinary. If you go to certain developed, highly developed countries in the world, they have these kind of single window which allows you to do business and set up these things. And apart from only those dangerous industries or highly sensitive industries which have an impact on health, like pharmaceutical, or food industry where you're doing food manufacturing, or some environmental industry where there are issues about environment and pollution, etc., you will not be requiring approvals. You'll be just requiring to submit your information and be allowed to work. There is also another component which is called zero time to startup. That has. So this is the basic idea, that we set up a portal which is connected to municipal, provincial, and federal regulators, and it serves as a single window for business setup. I hope that clarifies what DEEP would do when it's done. Thank you.
Well, question?
Yes, it's really nice to be here and hear a lot about reforms. The one point that which all agree here, I think, there is an inbuilt resistance from the lower level to the top, okay? Now, I haven't come across in these meetings that for each of the reforms, what about a resistance strategy? I mean, a strategy to overcome resistance. Let's suppose there is a reform A, and this is, I mean, one should say, Department A will have the highest resistance, Department B will have the lowest resistance, and how does one overcome that? What is the strategy to overcome? Because in the end, what is happening here in the last 20 years, I mean, these reforms can be seen in any of the World Bank book or now with PIDE also, okay? But there is complete resistance. And that there has to be a strategy to overcome the resistance. And I didn't see that here. Okay, thanks.
Please.
All right, my question is from the World Bank representative. My name is Naushidullah Shah, and I'm an architect, urban designer, academician, a traveler working in Peshawar since 24 years. I've graduated from an art school, so I've got that, thoughts with me. I belong to a tribal area that is Miranshah, North Waziristan. I'm the chief of Tapizat Tower 2, so I've got a responsibility. My question is regarding the masters of Pakistan, which are the people. And the, the bureaucracy, which is they call it the servant, the civil servants. So what is, to bring in, strengthen up the society or the people, we need to actually, being an architect, I see that we need to bring change in the ambience and in the infrastructure and in those projects so that it gives awareness to the people to strengthen it up. I've experienced it, like, for example, Florence was the city that when I entered, I came to know that those ambience and those architects were the leading that bring in those renaissance, right? So what is the World Bank policy for creating such opportunities like regenerating cities with their ambience and with their economic, development? So do you have any plans for that too? Are you considering it the architectural development or the open spaces? Thank you so much.
So let me respond to these resistance questions. I would like to reiterate Dr. Naяб's answer to the similar question, that although we do acknowledge that there is a resistance to change, the status quo will remain unless there is a public demand. Since PIDE is a public think tank, and what we are trying to do is to create the demand of reform. We want the public to discuss these ideas, these issues, and what is the potential way. So unless there is a public demand, there will be no reforms. To the second answer, second question.
Maybe I can just respond a little bit to a few of the points that have been raised. I mean, I think when it comes to deep and what's going to be different this time, I'm going to be very honest. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be different this time. I think what we see at the moment is that Pakistan is at a moment where we really need to see some change. We need to see some dramatic reform. What the World Bank is doing through the DEEP project is we're providing some support for technical systems, and we're providing some technical assistance and technical advice on how you can do regulatory reform. We've been working with the Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI, and our hope is that that will get the political backing that it needs to drive through these reforms. And as I said, the process that we're supporting is a mapping of those reforms. It's then going through and saying, what of those reforms can we cut away? What can we just get rid of because it's duplicative or unnecessary? And of the reform, of the regulations that are left, of the regulations that we do need, just as Bahari was saying, like how do we digitize them? How do we create systems so that they can be utilized and accessed by firms in the most easy and accessible way possible? That's not something that the World Bank can do by itself. There's no doubt about that. That requires strong political leadership. It requires the provincial and federal governments to work together. It probably requires top-level government commitment, doing some very difficult political things. I think our hope is that this might now be the moment for that to happen, given that Pakistan has been facing a very difficult economic situation for a very long time. And I think everyone in this room almost agrees that we're not going to fix Pakistan's macro challenges. We're not going to escape from reliance on the IMF. We're not going to escape from having a inadequate tax take, insufficient resources to deliver public services unless we get investment, right? So that's our hope. The need of the hour is increased investment. Reforming the business enabling environment is critical for that. That will require political leadership and a real sense of urgency that we've frankly been lacking for a little while. On the specific question about how the World Bank engages in communities and develops areas, regional development strategy, I mean, the way the World Bank works is always through government. And what we've been doing, for example, recently in the recently merged areas, for example, through our governance performance projects, we've been trying to establish the revenue systems and the public expenditure systems that mean that the provincial government is better equipped to raise revenue, the government is better equipped to establish state presence, the government is better equipped to deliver services in those areas. The way we do that is constantly through the government. They are the decision makers. We are there to finance. We are there to advise. And our hope, of course, is that government is doing that in a way that's as responsive to the needs of the community as it should be.
Well, thank you, Tobias, for excellent comments. Well, if both of you agree that to modernize the regulatory framework, regulatory guillotine is the best strategy, then I have a small concern, and we will discuss it later on, that if the regulatory guillotine is the best strategy, then why would we need mapping at the first stage? Because in my understanding, we don't need mapping. And we will end this session here. Thank you so much.